Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I'm Charlie Smith, the Executive Director of ESIG. I also serve in a leadership role with the Global Power System Transformation Consortium, or G-PST, whose mission is to bring together key actors to catalyze a rapid, clean energy transition at unprecedented scale and speed. This is being done by providing a coordinated and holistic approach to the necessary knowledge, education, and support to power system operators across the 5 action pillars. The foundation of the G-PST is a group of 6 system operators from around the globe who are facing higher penetration of wind and solar inverter-based resources sooner than any other operators in the world. The 5 pillars of the consortium are research and peer learning, technical support, workforce development, technology adoption support, and open data and tools. ESIG is the lead on Pillar 1, and more information on the G-PST can be found at globalpst.org. As the lead on Pillar 1, ESIG would like to welcome you to the monthly webinar of our joint G-PST Pillar 1 ESIG webinar series. This series is in addition to the regular ESIG monthly webinar series and focuses on the G-PST research agenda and associated topics being addressed in Pillar 1. Topics are presented by both the founding system operators and other advanced system operators active in Pillar 1, as well as members of industry and academia participating in the activities of the Research Agenda Group and the Research Advisory Committee of Pillar 1. An additional series of webinars on the other 4 pillars of the G-PST is also being provided on a monthly basis through NREL. For those of you who would like to learn more about G-PST and how to engage, please go to globalpst.org and click on the Get Involved tab. Further information on ESIG can be found at esig.energy. Next, I'd like to go over a few logistical matters before we get started. First of all, phones will be muted for the duration of the webinar to avoid unnecessary distractions. For the Q&A, we use the Slido platform at slido.com. You need to open a browser window, go to slido.com, and enter ESIG27 as the event code. The instructions are also at the bottom of the screen. You'll see a thumbs up button next to the questions on Slido to allow you to cast a vote to help prioritize the questions submitted. We plan to save about 10 minutes for Q&A at the end and then wrap it up at the top of the hour. An email with a link will be provided once the video file has been posted. We also plan to provide short responses to unanswered questions after the webinar, so please don't be afraid to ask your questions through Slido. Okay, so today our webinar is going to cover the changing role of resources and growth of utility scale storage in the Kaiso system. This is a topic which is gaining increased traction with system operators all over the world, with the increasing shares of wind and solar power being added to the systems, and which led to the resource adequacy nail-biter events in California during the first week of September. Today's webinar will feature Robert Kott, Operations Policy Manager at the California Independent System Operator. Bob has 35 years of utility experience and has been with the Kaiso for 21 years. He currently leads high-level operational initiatives in areas dealing with resource adequacy, among others. I'm very pleased to have Kaiso as a member of ESIG and to have Bob here with us today. Today's webinar will provide an update on the current state and future plans for supply resources for Kaiso as they continue an energy transition towards 100% zero carbon resources. This will include a review of their resource adequacy program, a review of the resource mix related to contributions to serving a varying load profile, a review of the impact of the interconnection queue on the future resource mix, and an overview of the drivers behind the energy transition. Okay, just a short reminder once again to use Slido at slido.com with the event code ESIG27 to ask your questions. And without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Bob, I'll now turn it over to you.
Thank you, Charlie, and welcome everybody to this webinar. I hope today to give you some information to help you understand where the ISO currently is with its resource mix and where it's going to be heading to get us to a carbon neutral grid. plan for 2045. I'm going to skip through my bio that was presented at the registration, so that was already discussed by Charlie. So we'll go right to the agenda. I'm going to cover, as I said, the current state of ISO resources and the expected future state of California ISO resource mix based on different policies that are in the works within the state of California. And so let's start off in discussing our current resource mix and some of the policies and processes that are involved in creating that resource mix. So we have a process that's run by the California Utilities Commission and other state agencies called the Integrated Resource Planning process, or commonly referred to as IRP within the state. And that's a long-term procurement process to plan for safe, reliable, and cost-effective electricity supply. This is, performed with input from approximately 40 or 50 load-serving entities within the state, and with them submitting their plans for supply in a 10-year forward process. So they're submitting their procurement plans to meet their load serving obligations. And then we also have the Resource Adequacy Program that's also managed by the California Public Utilities Commission in parallel with the California ISO, and that's a procurement process that's really run on an annual basis to ensure that the grid has sufficient capacity to meet the operational needs every day. There are studies that are performed in the year-ahead time frame that establish the amount of capacity that's required, both for local needs, flexible capacity, and for the peak load needs of the state. There's annual and monthly processes where the load serving entities and suppliers provide showings to demonstrate the capacity that's been secured. And then these secured resources then have an obligation to offer their capacity into our market, make it available in real time so that we can operate the grid reliably. Some of the drivers that we have that are actually just determining what the resource mix is are, a lot of policies developing, or that's been developed over the years to reduce greenhouse gases. I'll talk a little bit more about those later. This is driving the retirement of gas resources. A lot of these gas resources have already retired, and they'll continue to retire, but we need to make sure we have an orderly process for retiring them so they don't retire too soon. The state plan calls for energy generation from renewable resources. Of course, this began many years ago with our RPS standard, renewable portfolio standard, and that has resulted in a pretty rapid development of solar resources over the years. And now that solar capacity has gotten to a place where we need to have a mechanism to transition some of that energy to the off-peak periods, now we're getting storage resources to be able to deliver that energy to load, and I'll be discussing some details on that later. And then there's also an increasing reliance on price-responsive demand, and while we've had demand response programs in place for many years, again, there's an increasing pressure to increase those resources resources, and there's programs where those are being developed as well. And of course, we do continue to see the load forecasts continue to grow, and of course, this increases the pressure to expand the pool of resources we need to meet system needs. And examples of those things, of course, is the growth of electric vehicles, and then there's also a push to increase electrification to reduce gas use, both at residential and commercial levels for heating and even cooking. So just to kind of discuss a little bit more details about the resource adequacy program, some of the generally accepted elements of a good program is to have a forward planning study to determine a planning reserve margin based on expected level of risk. So our RA program does that with the studies we perform annually, as I discussed earlier. There's a periodic showing to assess whether sufficient capacity has been committed to deliver the generation to load. And I think I discussed that already, where we have both an annual and monthly showing process where the LSEs and suppliers both show their capacity. And then there's also mechanisms to procure capacity if there are shortages. So a mechanism to encourage or enforce full coverage to avoid shortages or leaning on one participating entity by another. So we have the capacity procurement mechanism where we're able to procure capacity for shortages. And if there are short LSEs, then those LSEs would be charged for the shortages if they didn't get their full procurement. So our program provides this mechanism. And then a process to make the capacity available to the operators of the system. And our program contains this mechanism, as we have a must-offer obligation for the resource adequacy resources. So getting into some of the details of the resources that we have what we call net qualifying capacity, and that really is the amount of capacity that has proven to be deliverable to load. This value changes throughout the year because some resources have NQCs that are based monthly. I have a graph that's going to show some of those values. This particular value that's on our website currently for September 1st is the September value. And then we have the installed capacity as of September 1st here for battery storage as 3,913 megawatts. And then we're showing you here the installed renewable resource mix as well. So as you can see, that a majority of our renewable resources is solar capacity, almost 60%, about 30% wind, and then the remaining geothermal, small hydro, and biofuels. So, and with a total installed solar capacity of almost 16,000 megawatts, that could be a little misleading. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the NQC values and the different fuel mixes for that NQC and how they change throughout the year. So yeah, while we have 15,000 megawatts of solar capacity, as you can see, this is a monthly chart showing the various capacities of NQC throughout the year. And you can see that the solar capacity in January, I've provided the numbers there so you can see what the actual numbers are, 500 megawatts in January, and then 5,000 megawatts in July. So these, of course, are for solar resources. NQC is established through a process called the effective load carrying capacity, so that 15,000 megawatts of installed capacity gets discounted for the amount of capacity that's actually able to serve load during the most critical times on the grid. So our critical hours are between 4 and 9 p.m. The solar, and I have some slides later where I'll talk about, the peak, and actually showing on September 9th of this year how the different resources met the load throughout the day. And the solar number is available for part of the critical hours, but it actually drops off to zero when the load is still actually quite high. And then I also provided the wind NQC the wind NQC throughout the year too, and that varies as well. Actually, I want to go back and show you that the wind number is around 8,000 megawatts, and that NQC that is really representing what capacity is available during the critical hours has been discounted to around 1,500, a little less. And then you can see that the bulk of the capacity is the natural gas resources. And then you see in the red here, what's labeled here as LESR, it really represents our lithium-ion storage battery capacity. LESR is load or a limited energy storage resource, and that's a fuel type that we use to designate batteries. Okay, so, and certainly we'll have a time for questions if I didn't cover something there. Moving on to some of our other generator statistics, our solar peak is the latest one, June 7th. We had solar serving over 14,000 megawatts. Wind this year, 6,000, almost 6,500 megawatts. And then we actually had some periods where the load was served completely by renewable resources. There's 103% there compared to demand, and that is that some of the reserves are carried by renewables. And then looking at our, we have a the amount of peak, or the peak from imports was almost 12,000 megawatts, and that was set in 2019. And then, of course, as many of you may know, we just updated our peak demand this September 6th at 52,000 megawatts. The prior peak was set back in 2006 at 50,270. And then another key statistic is our steepest 3-hour ramp, and that number was set at 17,660 earlier in the spring this year. So then the other statistic we keep track of is the amount of curtailments that occur each month. And of course, you can see here that the curtailments are greatest in the spring hours or spring months, where you have a lot of excess solar capacity and the load is low. And we do export a lot of energy, but again, loads are low in the west too, so there's not an ability to export all the solar capacity, so it does get curtailed along with wind in the spring months. But you can see that during the summer months, those curtailments do get quite low. And of course, batteries are helping us with reducing curtailments. And so you can see here, I'm showing how our battery storage capacity has grown by looking at the capacity commercially available as of June 1st of each year, starting back in 2013, which is really the first year that we had any battery capacity. And it looks like the values are zero, and they were, relative to where we are now, practically zero. I think the numbers were around less than 10 megawatts for the first 4 years of the storage that we had. And then in 2017, we started to get some larger resources, and then it's really shot up exponentially in the last few years. And that trend is expected to continue, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. Here, just trying to illustrate how the resources are meeting the load, and you can see here in the yellow, this is the solar resources, and from the middle of the day, this chart goes from 12 p.m. to 12 a.m., which is only really representing half of the day. I think if I got this right. So 12 noon, 12 a.m. And so you're only getting the good solar, and you see that this 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. period is that critical period of serving load where the solar is dropping off, and we really need the natural gas and imports to step up and serve the load as the solar resources drop off. Now this slide is from 2019, so you don't see a lot of contribution from batteries here because they weren't very significant at that time. So what I did here was provide a picture from our recent heat event, similar type of graphic showing how our resources met the load on the peak day. You can see the green here represents renewables. Next slide, I'm going to show a breakdown of that. But you can see that large part of our load was served by natural gas. And as the solar dropped off, the natural gas imports and batteries really were the keys to, and actually large hydro, keys to serving the load as the solar dropped off during those times when the sun was going down. So this is basically the same day, showing the load curve here, and then the breakdown of the renewable resources. You've got the solar here. You can see that provides a good amount of energy during the day, but you can see that the solar capacity is dropping off at a faster rate than the load is dropping. And although we can see in this graph that the wind is providing some increase to make up some of that loss of solar, but not quite significant enough to cover all of it. So you can, in this slide here, this is actually the day before, and I selected this day because this was the day that battery capacity peaked, somewhere around 3,300 or 3,400 megawatts, and was a big contributor to meeting that load as the solar capacity dropped off. But you can also see here that our imports also provided significant support for those evening hours as well, where the imports were almost 10,000 megawatts during that day. And you could say that the response is similar in other days during that heat event, which started on the 5th, or actually started before then, but really things got tight and we entered emergency conditions on the 5th, and those were extended through the 8th of September. Here, just illustrating how solar and wind production have driven a shift in the use pattern for conventional resources. So we track the net demand. So that represents essentially what our conventional resources have to respond to. The net demand is really defined as our load minus the wind and solar resources on the grid. And so our conventional resources have to serve the load represented by this green curve here. So that's the picture of our current resources, and now I'm going to move towards the discussion of future state of our resource mix. And again, starting with the drivers, we had a Senate bill passed in 2018 that is discussed as the 100% Clean Energy Act of 2018, signed by Governor Brown. It increases the renewable portfolio standard requirement from 50% by 2030 to 60% by 2030. And it creates a state policy of planning to meet all retail electricity supply with a mix of RPS, as we discussed earlier, the renewable portfolio standard eligible, and zero carbon resources by the end of 2045. Now, the resource mix that we're talking about for the future is based on this policy. And having said that, I think there's already been more policy passed. I think there were some new legislation signed by Governor Newsom this year that will create even new requirements. So those will drive future resource mix discussions. But for today, I'll be talking about the resource plans that were developed under this policy. And so the process that I discussed at the beginning, where we have the IRP, integrated resource planning process, provides inputs into developing the resource mix of the future. And this shows approximately what's expected to be serving load based on the plans that are submitted by the load serving entities. You can see that the utility scale solar will be required to increase quite significantly, up to almost 70,000 gigawatts or 70,000 megawatts by 2045, and then a vast increase in the storage capacity as well. And then there's also going to be long duration storage, which we don't currently have much of, although the pumped storage hydro does qualify for that. There are other technologies that may fit into this category for the future. And then another resource that is just recently added is on offshore wind. We've had quite a bit of onshore wind, but offshore wind is new, I think, to this particular year's plan, and that's indicating 10,000 megawatts by 2045. So these are the projections of what load serving entities and the state believe will be necessary to meet that clean energy by 2045. Now I've got some of the actual numbers that came out of those plans. and graph them here so you can kind of see how the resource mix is advancing over the years. And you can see that the solar and battery storage will dominate the plans in order to get to that 100% renewable. Now, as I understand it, 100% clean energy really is it's focused on the retail energy, and so there is some room for non clean resources, and you can see we've got gas is still showing up in these portfolios, and of course these are extensions, and as I said, would caveat this to say that this gets reviewed every year with new policies and new plans, and so it'll look different next year, but this kind of gives us a picture of where we think we might be going. And then this, I guess, I'm thinking that a presentation about resources isn't complete without talking about the duct chart. So this is actually, again, an old slide that needs to be updated. This is from 2019, showing actual net load and where it's expected to be in 2030, and then the amount of solar energy shown here is with about 30,000 megawatts of solar here. We talked about the maximum 3-hour ramp that occurred this year was almost 18,000 megawatts, expected to go to 30,000 or 25,000 megawatts in 2030. So we'll be working to update this slide in future years. So talk a little bit about primary drivers, motivating market reforms. We're working on enhancing the day-ahead market and extending that to EIM entities, so leverage regional diversity. As I talked about, there has been some benefit that we've gained from our real-time energy imbalance market by allowing us to export solar resources and reduce the amount of curtailments. And by extending our day-ahead market, we'll be able to do more optimization and reduce curtailments even further, and have take advantage of resource diversity across the West. We're continuing to refine our market products, rules, modeling, and system tools to integrate new technologies and replace operational attributes provided by the gas-fired fleet. A lot of this has to do with the work we're doing on to integrate batteries and hybrid resources. So we have initiatives in our market to do a better job of optimizing the use of batteries and to allow hybrid resources to better represent what their capabilities are throughout the day. So we have a lot of initiatives around those tools and the new characteristics of batteries and hybrid resources. And then with resource efficiency, we're increasing or enhancing our resource efficiency policies around used in our current EIM market, and then also working on defining resource efficiency for the extended day-ahead market, so that we can align the different needs of entities throughout the West and bring us together to allow us to share resources and address the conditions on the grid where we have tightening supply. So regarding resource adequacy, the CPUC is implementing a slice of day RA reforms to address the net peak load and reliability across a 24-hour period. And this is to really refocus the RA program to recognize the energy limitations for a fleet with deep storage penetration. So the current RA program really focuses on the peak needs and requires us to establish a single value for load and the resources required to meet that load throughout the day. And so these reforms are going to transition that program to allow us to recognize what resources can provide and how the load changes throughout the day. And the ISO is looking for opportunities to harmonize programs with CPUC and to enhance our market mechanisms to address the different needs and the supply uncertainty that's presented by the renewable resources and hybrid and batteries. So there's a lot of work going on in this area. And with that, I've come to the end of my slides, and I'll open it up for questions. Charlie?
Okay, thank you for that, Bob. I'll just remind the participants that we're using Slido. So to ask questions, go to slido.com. The password is ESIG27 for today, and go ahead and put your questions in there. And I can see we've got about 15 questions so far, and I'll start with the ones that have risen to the top. One from Bill Peters here. How is CAISO managing the storage state of charge or otherwise optimizing use of storage?
Well, I think we do have a mechanism in our market to optimize storage in our day-ahead market. The state of charge is submitted into our market. Well, I guess bids are provided in our day-ahead market, and then our market optimization establishes a day-ahead reward that intends to place the batteries where they need to be in a day-ahead time frame. And then in real time, the bids submitted by the resource owners are submitted, and our market does take information about what the state of charge is and attempts to optimize the use of the resource based on those bids and the state of charges that it's getting throughout the day. Now, it certainly is an area where we're working to make some improvements, and we have some initiatives where we're trying to do some better optimization with that.
Okay. Another question here. How much storage is being installed based on economics versus mandates? And does that make a difference in how CAISO would want to use the storage resources?
That I probably need to get back to you on that one. I'm not sure what the mandates are. I understand there might be some mandates in the CPUC's program. I'm not familiar with what those are. So I don't really have a good answer for you right now. Maybe that's something I can answer offline.
Okay, but as far as you know right now, you just get bids for batteries and they're put into the stack and dispatched. on the similar basis?
Yeah, I mean, I think the bottom line is that our load serving entities have an obligation to serve their load. I know that there are standards for the renewable standards, renewable portfolio standard requirements. So LSEs do have to meet those renewable portfolio standards. So there's percentages there. And in order to meet those and serve their load, they need to have batteries to shift that energy. So I think that's how the requirement probably manifests itself, is that in order to serve their load, they have to have a mechanism to shift the renewable energy to the off-peak periods. Beyond that, I'm not exactly sure. And I think the question was about installation. Is that right? What are the mandates to install batteries?
Mandates versus economics. I remember back a few years ago, there was, I guess it was a goal set by, I can't remember if it was a CPUC or the CEC, but it was one of the first in the country to require, I think it was the 3 large IOUs to procure some 1,500 megawatts of energy storage over some period of time. It's going back a few years. That may be over by now.
Yeah, I do remember those, and I'm not, and there might be some of those requirements. I'm just not familiar with what those are.
Okay, well, we can follow up on that if need be in the responses to the questions. Here's one on hydrogen that's kind of risen to the top, and it's something I noticed in listening to your presentation also, Bob. I didn't see hydrogen mentioned in there. And the question is, do you expect to see much hydrogen in your future mix? As you probably know, it's a very hot topic around the country and around the world today. A lot of people, especially with the Infrastructure Investment Act, subsidies for hydrogen production, looking at a future along with the DOE program to bring down the cost of hydrogen over the next decade, and looking at all of that curtailed energy in the spring and the fall. Just, I guess, wondering what you see as far as the hydrogen outlook for your future energy mix.
I think that is still being looked at. There certainly is the potential. I think there's a lot of challenges with it too. One of the things that I discovered as I was looking at the IRP program is there is a line item for hydrogen load, which is a program that doesn't have anything ascribed to it currently, but it would be, if it is subscribed to, it would essentially be a load where an entity would be producing hydrogen, and then ostensibly that would be used perhaps in generation, but there isn't anything that's committed on that yet. And I certainly have heard of and seen some projects where entities have committed to using a portion of their fuel as hydrogen. There's some projects planned for the future where they would begin to add hydrogen as a mix, initially starting, say, at 10%, and then increasing the percentage of hydrogen over the years, with a goal of trying to get to 100% hydrogen. And certainly there are the technologies in gas turbines can use 100% hydrogen. The challenge is, where do you get the hydrogen? How do you store it? How do you transport it? Its volume is greater than natural gas, so there's that challenge. And so the projects that are proposing to use hydrogen typically have to be able to produce it on and store it on site, at least currently, because there isn't transportation for it. And I think the transportation could be a challenge as well, because the volume is larger for the same amount of therms energy value. Yeah, so I think it's one of those things that will probably develop over the years. You know, it could be a valuable resource for the future, and I think there's a lot of activity that I've seen on different aspects of hydrogen. You know, different ways of producing it, green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, gray hydrogen. You know,
right.
So it certainly seems to be a lot of activity around it, and certainly it seems like something that could contribute in the future.
Yeah, you make a good point too, that there's two sides of the question. One is the hydrogen that will be produced as a load, where it'll be used probably to substitute fossil fuels in transportation or industry. And then there's hydrogen that would be produced for generation, also to substitute natural gas and power plants. So it certainly is an evolving landscape, but a quickly evolving landscape, and I think one that bears close watching. Okay, question on energy efficiency. I think energy efficiency wasn't called out specifically in your plan, and the question is, why isn't it a bigger part of the plan for the future?
Well, I don't know that it's not part of the plan, because I think energy efficiency is usually performed at the load serving entity level, and I'm not sure that they would include it in the plan that I'm presenting. I think it's usually considered more as a reduction to the load before the resources that we see in the IRP. I could be wrong on that, but I believe that the energy efficiency planning is done at the LSE level and doesn't really get included as a line item, but it's considered in reducing the amount of load that needs to be served. That's my understanding.
Yeah, I guess a related question would be the price responsive load. That I think that's within CAISO's mandate, but I'm not positive on that. I don't remember seeing price responsive load in.
Oh yeah, well actually that is a part of the program, and I think it's currently, there were no resources listed there, so it probably wasn't listed in the table or the graph because the values were zero. But I understand there's actually two. There's I guess the load DR shed and DR shift as part of the program. So you might see some of that developing in the future. And one is a shed would be that the load is just reduced and it's gone, whereas the shift would be the load is shifted from one time to another. So those are, I think, potential things for the future and future plans.
Yeah, I think they're getting more attention around the world now as well with tighter supplies. Okay, question on the market products. What reforms or new products is CAISO considering for its energy and ancillary service markets? I think you mentioned in one of the slides that that's one of the things that was under consideration for the future, with greater renewable resource mix, replacing some of the conventional fossil machines.
Yeah, I think I'm not that familiar with what those details are. There's an uncertainty product that's being proposed in our day-ahead market, which will actually build in some uncertainty in the day-ahead dispatch. I'm not sure if I'm using the exact right term for that. And you know, currently we have our flexible requirement. Not sure if we have others. In balance reserve actually was the one I was thinking of. That will be part of the enhanced, or the day-ahead market enhancement. So that's one of the enhancements that's being proposed. I'm not aware of any others, although I think there are some things that they're working on.
Okay, I think we'll skip over the next question, which is also related to ancillary services and flexible load participation in the market. I think we just spoke about that. Similar, does the resource adequacy capacity include flexible demand, or just include traditional peaking plants plus energy storage systems? I think we pretty well answered that one as well in the last few questions. A question about the strategic reserve. How will the strategic reserve impact price formation and resource adequacy integrity? What is the bright line between resource adequacy and the strategic reserve?
Well, as I understand it, I'm not sure I can really speak to the price formation part of it, but I think the bright line is that the strategic reserve is specifically limited to use during emergency conditions. And RA is of course available at all times, and so emergency conditions really is those conditions that are beyond what the RA program was designed to address. So I think that's I don't know if that answers the question, but I think that the emergency conditions is really the bright line that separates RA from the strategic reserve program.
I think that'll probably be an ongoing question in my mind anyway, that how do you plan for capacity that you don't plan to use? Yes, that's
yeah, it's a good challenging question.
right.
I mean, I think it's there because in some sense you expect because of maybe the extreme weather events seem to be increasing, the RA program doesn't necessarily base its capacity on those types of events. It's using more average types of capacity values, than the strategic reserve is looking at more extreme types of conditions.
Yeah. Okay, here's a question that's kind of related to some of the previous questions. If load flexibility is considered cheaper and more environmentally friendly compared to the usage of batteries, I guess the question is kind of positing that load flexibility is cheaper and more environmentally friendly, then why is battery deployment regularly preferred? I guess really going to the question, why isn't load flexibility shown in your resource plans for the future? Sounds like
yeah. Again, I think that's up to the LSEs to develop that to the extent they're able to. I mean, I think to get a load flexibility program in, then you have to find an entity that's able to do something flexible with their load. And so right. I think, as I understand it, that's certainly something that's expected to be, or they have a place for it in the program. Just nobody's actually posed anything.
Yeah. Okay, question on batteries. To what extent are batteries dispatched for energy arbitrage versus fast frequency response?
I'm not sure. Fast frequency response. I'm not sure what that is. Is there a reference to something specific in our market?
I suppose it could be even automatic generation control or disturbance response.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I suppose we could say that initially when the battery capacity was low, below 500 megawatts, most of the battery capacity was used in our regulation market. I don't know if that's really, that doesn't necessarily equate to fast frequency response. Maybe it does. That's why I was wondering if there's more a specific question on that. And now that the battery capacity has increased significantly above 500 megawatts, then you see that there's a good portion of the capacity that's now shifting energy from midday to the evening hours. The percentage-wise, I don't have a number. I guess I could guesstimate it's maybe 20% regulation, 80% energy. I don't really have any numbers to back that up, but that's just a guesstimate.
Yeah, probably looking at the curves from the heat wave in early September, I would guess that maybe even more than that was going to energy arbitrage or energy.
Yeah, and I think it varies on a daily basis too.
Yeah.
And of course, it's all driven by the bids and from the batteries versus bids from other resources too, and our market optimizes those for the most economic outcome.
Right. Here's one on hybrids, interesting one. Are you seeing more hybrid renewables plus storage or standalone storage being most valuable to resource adequacy on a short-term basis? There's a lot of EV hybrid plants going in California.
I don't know that one or the other is more valuable. We have our modeling enables resources to register themselves as hybrid or what we call co-located, so they can essentially have their resource represented as a standalone battery and a solar resource located next to each other, utilizing a common point of interconnection. But our market sees them as the fuel types, battery and solar. But they're also able to represent themselves as a hybrid resource. And I think our policy attempts to credit them equally in either situation, if I understand it correctly, so that there's not really an advantage of one over the other for our program.
Okay. Question on different types of storage, pumped hydro, batteries, and hydrogen. Your views on them. I think we've probably covered that sufficiently for the moment. Looking at the future wind additions seem very low compared to solar. I noticed that also. Wind additions, even with the offshore, I think the 10 gigawatts of offshore you showed. Why is it that wind, which started off so rapidly in California, is so much lower now than the solar projections?
Well, I think that has a lot to do with the potential, I guess, preferred sites, if you will. California's not really, I think, best suited for wind. In fact, the best sites for wind are in the middle of the country. I think, namely, Wyoming really has a lot of great wind potential. And I think that, if I understand correctly, there's a lot of potential of wind in Wyoming that hasn't been committed to in some of these plans, and I think there's an opportunity for that to increase. But of course, that has to be coincided with transmission to bring that potential to the West Coast, or to from Wyoming to California. And I think there are some projects that are doing that, but there is potential for more of that. So my understanding is that there's just not a lot of of wind potential in California. And then when you start going offshore, the cost increased dramatically. So I think it becomes partly an economic question as well.
Okay. All right. So it's about 5 o'clock here on the East Coast. We're at the top of the hour, so I think we're going to need to wrap it up. Bob, I want to thank you for quite an interesting walk through the CAISO resource mix and resource adequacy concerns, and quite an interesting view from California. I think a lot of people will find it interesting in thinking about their own local situations. And as I mentioned earlier, an email will go out once the video file has been posted, and we'll get the responses to the unanswered questions posted as quickly as possible. We appreciate your engagement, and if you'd like to stay engaged, I'd invite you to participate in the next ESIG webinar on Thursday, on the role of offshore energy islands and Denmark's energy future, and in our fall workshop in Minneapolis the last week of October. Further information on the workshop and all of our webinars can be found on our website at esig.energy under events, and you're all invited to attend. Information on all the G-PST webinars can also be found at globalpst.org. And Bob, I want to thank you again for this very timely webinar, and thank all of you for your interest. We look forward to seeing you again in the near future. And in the meantime, everyone, take care, stay safe, and thanks again for your participation. Bye for now.